I'm Peter, and I want to quickly explain how to set up a CI pipeline with AWS Lightsail, triggered from GitHub Actions for a Django project. So, what do we want to do? Well, we want to change some code, push that with Git, merge it or commit it or whatever, just change it in any case, run some automated tests, for instance, a linter or a user test, and then create a deployment, which involves several steps, and usually it's a complex process that you don't want to do without any automation. So before we get started, I expect you have some experience with Git, and you probably have a Python-based project before, like Django, but you can also use Flask or Fast API. It depends on what you prefer. So that's it. Basically, what we want at the end of this session is that we change the code and then get a notification if all it's done, and that all these manual steps are taken care of automatically. What we'll be using is VS Code, of course, to edit the code. So you have a Django project YAML file that will be there for the GitHub workflows, a configuration file for AWS. Then on GitHub, we'll use the GitHub Actions and, of course, the secrets that are alongside with that. And then we'll have AWS Lightsail, where you have the container services, the S3 buckets, and the database that we're going to be using. I'm not going to go into those topics and how to set up. There's different tutorials for that, but I just want to show the bigger picture on how it all runs. Now let's look at my code. So if I just go to my file structure, I'm going to close all of these and wrap it up a little bit, just for you to have an overview. So I have my source, which is all the Django. So it's a typical Django project. Non-code is not for now. Infrastructure is where I keep all the information I need for AWS. So it has the deployment configuration stating which containers we want in a bit and which one to open up, which we do with the public endpoint. So we're going to say, hey, we want to have an Nginx container on port 80, and we're going to want two more containers, which is a development and a production server. Okay, now let's go and make a change to our code. I'm just going to make an edit to the README, so not to disturb anything. So let's just add another enter and then hit save. And what you see is, of course, my code has changed, nothing significant. But nevertheless, I'm going to commit this code. So test for video and hit commit. So because in my folders, I have this GitHub and then GitHub workflows folder, you can put YAML files in here. And because you have those will trigger a workflow. In this case, it will have triggered a triage workflow. And how do I know that? Well, because I made this YAML file. You should read these as such. Jobs is the bit that will run. So these are all the tasks that's going to run, and everything above jobs is set up. Basically, it says if I push code on the branch, whatever branch, as long as it's not master, then run, and I use these configurables. So this is the region that I want in AWS. This is the service in Lightsail. And then this is concurrency. So if there's multiple jobs in the same concurrency group, they will all fail or stop. That has to do with timing. It's beside the point, a little bit more advanced. And then it will run all these steps. So it will run my test suite, basically, and I'm going to run through one of these, but all of them are more or less the same thing. So it will have a name, and you can see then there's a block of code. It's a little bit like Python where you have the indentation, just the syntax is much different. You should view each step, each job as a separate computer trying to do something. So don't see it as one big GUI thing, but see it as a brand new computer. So let's say we have a fresh Ubuntu install and I wanted to run my Django tests. Well, I first need my code. So I import the checkout, and that basically downloads my code into this container. Then it installs Python, so we need those dependencies, upgrade pip to the latest version, install my requirements that I keep in this folder. It's very typical. You would do this on any other computer if you would initiate a new GitHub project, I think. Make an environment file. I was able to find this spicy pizza create env file workflow. That's something that somebody else created. You can Google this and find their repository. But basically, it allows me to set up an env file. And you see, I have some secrets. On the secrets, if I go to GitHub, to my Maker portfolio, then what you want to do is for each of these workflows, go to your settings and specify what secrets they have access to. So in this case, my Django project uses a database with a user and a username, and you can simply add those here. So if you want either new secret, you can give it a name, which is the name that's going to be here, and then whatever value is going to be. So in this case, the workflow will basically just fetch the database password by looking at this thing. Now, let's look at the GitHub action that I just triggered by updating my README file. You can see it's in full swing. It finished the linting and the testing. So the testing is what we were just looking at. So let's just fold that one up. You see it's deploying to triage. So that's interesting. Apparently that's this step because you can see the name. It depends on linter and test suite. So basically it says only start if these two are going. And then what should it do? Again, look at it as a brand new computer. So it's basically get the GitHub issue, make an environment file, set up an AWS client because we need to access the AWS command line interface so that we can actually talk to AWS to send the images later on. Then we log into AWS with the secrets. Again, also my AWS secrets are in those GitHub secrets thing in the settings. And then we're going to make migrations, collect static files, all those lovely things that you are very accustomed to if you used Django before. And then we're going to build a Docker image. Also very typical, so it's just a Docker command that you would otherwise run in your command line, except now we run this Docker file that I keep in my infrastructure folder, so Docker infrastructure. It's a very typical Docker file where it just says install the requirements, expose a port, and then run a UWSGI server. This is all from the Django documentation, so you could find it. It's very typical, just a regular old Django container, a Docker container. And if this was succeeded, then we also push the Nginx container to AWS after we created it. And if all is done, we quit and create a pull request. This final bit is a step that only runs if there's a failure. So let's say the step fails, then I get a Telegram message coming up. And then it creates a pull request. I'm just on my own, so we were looking at this sheet before, right? So this is what we want to end up with. An Nginx folder, an Nginx server that is able to talk to both Django production and Django development server, and all of that should be in Lightsail. So that's what we're doing here. We build those images using Docker build and send them to the backend using just simple commands. By using this pipe, I can use a multi-line command. So you could just do run and type all of this stuff in one big line, but it would be very hard to read. So now it just is easier to read. And basically what you see is, hey, use that image that we create, Nginx latest, and push it to Lightsail using the AWS CLI. So it goes like that. Why do I use Lightsail? Well, it's cheap, just $7 a month for the simplest version. It's much simpler for the graphical interface than the normal AWS, which I don't think is very well designed, but apparently it works very good and the servers are pretty good. It's highly scalable. You can scale up to 20 copies of your code. You'd have no need to run your own server, which is great, and it's fail-safe. So it stores old images and you can easily revert back to old images if you need to. And if a deployment fails, the old version stays alive, which I also really like. So if I mess up something, it will not break my site immediately. As you can see, it's completed. So it pushed all the images to AWS. It's actually pretty cool. We can see that. So here we go. Log into AWS, go to the containers, go to MapMaker, which is the project we're working on. And what you'll be seeing is, hey, it's deploying. So what we did is we changed the code, committed it to GitHub. GitHub started this run, started deploying, and created a pull request for me. Meanwhile, Lightsail is still deploying this version for me. You can see it's here. Keeps the other version active for a while. And as I said, it's highly scalable. So you can change this to one instance, but you can have, if you want, many instances of your containers. I also use S3 and a database in Lightsail. I'm not going to go into that, but it's equally simple. So how should we finish our workflow for today? Well, I changed the code, right? Updated the README, ran some tests, deployed the the test environment, and then created a pull request. So I think that's where we are right now. If I go to GitHub, what you'll see is indeed there is a pull request. So this was automatically created. This is the change that we made. If we look at it, you'll see, no, this is a different change, but it should also contain that one commit where we change an extra space to the README file. Indeed, there it is. So that's the conversation. You'll see that all the checks have passed, which is the linter, the testing, all these steps that we wanted automated. So I can just safely hit merge, and this will trigger another workflow because I have it set up in such a way that now my coworkers can just use that test environment that I'll have on a separate domain name. Basically, you can see it here, right? So it will serve the test environment. And if everyone is happy with the environment as it is, then we'll just run another set of tests and deploy to production and send a notification. Okay, so because I just hit merge, another workflow will have started. It's the one for production. It's not going to go through all of it, but you'll see the very same thing happen. So it's a big workflow. I'm going to zoom in slightly, but basically it starts. This start sends me a Telegram message. So let's look at that. Hey, new deployment started. Got a message from AutoCAD. I made that image. It's not from GitHub itself. But at least that's running. You see it's running those tests again that we specified before. It's again building a new image. It checks if we are already deploying. That's sometimes you start deploying two things at the same time, and then that's not a good thing. So better wait and then enable the latest images and notify for success. If we look at the workflow, it's fairly typical and more or less the same thing. But let's look at the actual deployment of the containers. So you can see again, same thing, right? So how should it run? Well, this one should run on only the master branch when I merge master. You see the test suite and the linter, which are exactly the same as in the previous workflow. Start notification is just a Telegram message that I got through another that I found on GitHub Marketplace. But let's look at the build Django. So what should it do? Building the Django image, we look at the start notification, linter, and test suite. So if all of those complete, then only then we'll start building this image. It should run on Ubuntu. I get my code from GitHub. I create an environment variable file. You can see where should it go in the source folder core. So that's here and then on my core, and that's where all my settings files are. So it makes sense to add my environment variable there. And then I get the Amazon CLI tools so that I can talk to the Lightsail container instances. I log in with using the secrets that I showed you before. So those are slightly different, right? So I had the triage database, but now I have my production database. So those are different keys, so you can play around with that. So you can have two versions. Now I create my new Docker container by running the Docker command, using the mapmaker latest image. So that's just the one using this Docker file for production. And then let's look at the Docker file. So basically it says use Python Buster, simplest version. This is standard and typical for Python. So you don't have all the buffered writes, which slows it down. I want to expose port 8000, install my requirements, copy everything that's in the source folder, and then just run that using the AWS GI server. So that's fairly typical. That's an image, so that's a package container, and then I upload that image to the AWS container registry. And if that works, then all is good. If that worked, then that image should be added here. Let's look how far it is. Go to Actions, see how far along it is. And zoom in. It's currently checking if we are still deploying, but no, we are running, so it should work. And what you can see is this one is gray. That means that this is the image that we are currently using with Nginx and this mapmaker dev. And you see that we just uploaded a minute ago because it's 65 right now. So this is a brand new image coming up. And what you see is it indeed saw that we were no longer deploying, and therefore it can enable the latest image. So what you'll see is that if I refresh, it already went. So what you see is deploy images is the final command. So it again sets up all the requirements to have access to my keys, so access to my AWS keys, and set up the command line tool and all that, so we can run this one command, which basically says, hey, from Lightsail, create a new deployment with the service name that you specified up there, and then for the containers, use this file as the configuration file and use this endpoint, which is the endpoint that we all specified here in the AWS folder. So an Nginx server on port 80, Django on 8080, and the production on 8000, and then route all traffic in through container port 80. Now this will take a minute, and that will allow me to show you something else really cool. So while this thing runs, I want to show you this. I also have an action that is there for auto-scaling. So this will run every 5 minutes, which is really cool, and it will check what capacity my container is at. So you can see here you have capacity and metrics, and you can see my container is running fairly slow on just 9% of its capacity, but I made a script that just checks. So apparently it was running at 16% capacity and 10% memory in the last period of 900 seconds, so I think that's 6 minutes or so. And I wrote a Python script that you can see here, autoscale.py, that then makes a decision on what it should do. And apparently it says minimum instances reached, so that means that I said I want only a minimum of 1 instances running, but you could also say I want minimum of 5 instances running, and then you can also see that it's deploying right now, because that's actually what we're doing right now. But you can write that script so that you change the capacity. So let's say your metrics go over 80 or 90%, then you can say, well, scale me up by creating a new container, and then you'll have an extra one like we discussed here. It's at your own risk, really, but I just wanted to show you what's possible. Another really cool repository is this one, Uptime, which basically runs on GitHub Actions too, which allows you to check if a website is up or down. So in this case, they made a broken test case, and then you get this, and that will create a partial outage and an issue for it to run. I'm not sure if the demo website is up as well. We have made view sample site indeed. Yeah, so this just runs in your GitHub pages, and you can see it's a GitHub action that checks if your site is down, and if it did, then it will open an issue for it, which I think is really cool. So let's recap on what we did. We wanted to change code, run automated tests, and deploy. We wanted to do that from VS Code into GitHub Actions and then deploy to Lightsail. We wanted to have 1 container instance because that's enough for now, but we want to have huge flexibility and scalability. And we wanted to have a pull request in the middle where we change the code, run the tests, then create a pull request so we can discuss the code changes and validate it on the triage environment before going to production, and then run the tests and again and deploy to the production, and then get a notification the minute that the deployment succeeded and validate that the server is up. I think we are currently on that last step right now for MapMaker, where we are trying to validate whether the server is up. Yeah, as you can see, that's exactly what's going on. So we did the linting, we built a container, we checked if we were ready to update, then we enabled the latest images and notify success. And that last one is waiting for the new version to come out. Basically what this thing does is it makes attempts. So it just polls and sees, looking for a version higher than 285, which is the version that we have here. So you see 285 is active, and we are waiting for 286 to come on live. So what was the result? It was not ready yet, remaining attempts, so I gave it 250 attempts, and it's trying again in every 10 seconds. And what you see is that we are still waiting for 285, and it's waiting for it, but now it's activating, and this will go on attempt 37. Hey, but what you see is it apparently worked. So this version was live. So if we look at the workflow, we should see that there's one final step. Yeah, it was live. And then the only thing it should do is notify of success, which was also done. So if we go to Telegram, you'll see that I have a message that says, hey, deployment was successful. There was the run, which corresponds to the URL. Server is up, we checked. So let's have a look. Beautiful, it's up. And it shows me the deployment log. So these are all the steps that it took to get there. So that's my GitHub Action run. It's fairly straightforward, but I was very glad to show it. If there's any questions, drop a comment in the comments.